Food, food, food. Jews, we eat. I mean, everyone eats, but Jews, we eat. Meals are elevated to an art form, especially during the holidays. But there can be a dark side to eating. There are many who struggle with their relationship to food and eating. We have a special guest joining us today to talk about eating disorders, Jews, holidays, and everything in between. I'm Avi Feingold, and along with Yudita Eisenstadt, Matthew Leibel, and special guest Ilana Zackon, we are Not in Heaven. Jews have a, let's say, interesting relationship to food. Shabbat and holidays are filled with big meals. We're about to go into a big season with that. The stereotype of Jewish moms includes their insistence on feeding anyone in close proximity. And yet, there are many who have a complicated relationship with eating or with their bodies. Eating disorders can be associated with negative body image, but there are many other ways in which unhealthy relationships to food can manifest. Ilana Zackon recently won the award for Best 2D Short Film at the 2025 Fantasia Film Festival for her short film, Grain. In it, a young woman trapped in the throes of a binge-eating disorder became a ravenous creature threatening to devour the town. Ilana is an actor, writer, and filmmaker. She's the former co-host of the CJN's very own Culturally Jewish, and of course, was a founding co-host of Bonjour Chai. I'm so excited to be speaking to you today. Ilana, welcome to Not in Heaven.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So, first of all, mazel tov on the success of Grain.
Thanks.
Broadly, as we said, the film deals with having a challenging relationship with food, eating, body image. And I understand some of the themes are drawn from your own personal experience.
Yeah, that's right.
What has it been like to take something so personal and usually private and put it on a big screen?
So I actually came up with the idea for this movie while I was going through a binge eating disorder in like 2013. So I was super young. I was 20 years old. And I remember thinking to myself, if I ever somehow recover from this, I want to turn it into something. And I always had this image of a rolling ball of wheat. And I remember thinking to myself, maybe I'll call it like Confessions of a Wheat Head or something, where I felt like all of the bread and like bakery goods that I was inhaling essentially was making my brain feel like it had all this grain inside of it. It took me about a decade to come to the idea of making it as an animated film. So I always had that in the back of my head of like, I want to do something with this. And then I spent 2 years working on it and I barely told anyone. Like my mom did not know that I made this movie until I got into Fantasia. So I'd been working on this kind of in secret because it was so private. And even though there are many people in my life that know what I went through, I kind of was like, I'm going to wait until I have to talk about this. And I remember posting on Instagram about Fantasia because I couldn't tell anyone for a couple months. And I was so anxious that it took me like an hour to actually click post. And then it was totally fine. And everyone was extremely supportive. And that is like the beauty of when you actually make something meaningful, people seem to respond.
What I wanted to know, when you work on something for that long and it's something personal and you get farther and farther away from the event,
Gets easier.
Is it easier or is it harder because you feel like you're a little less raw about it? So why is it easier?
I think just from an emotional standpoint, like I can use the theater version as an example. Like I was developing a version of this that was me and one other actor, because there's a lot of stats around eating disorders with the LGBTQ community. So he's a gay man and we were workshopping this version where it was my story and then him struggling with his own weight as a gay man. And every time that I would leave the rehearsal, I just like had to shut it off. Like I couldn't even look at what I did, which was really not helpful from an artistic perspective. Like I couldn't pull myself out. It was just a little too raw. First of all, writing it as an animated film gave me a lot more distance from the material because it was all done through metaphor. And I specifically did it in a way where it wouldn't be triggering for people who have gone through that eating disorder. You never actually see the main character eating. She turns into this ball of wheat, and the ball of wheat is the thing that kind of represents her eating disorder.
I want to ask an interpretive question, and you may just say like it's left for me to interpret, but I think there's significance here, and I would like to hear you talk about it. In the film, the ball of grain is threatening to the town, to everybody around the person, and not the woman herself. I sort of imagine eating disorders are like personally self-destructive, but like, are you making a statement that like, why is the ball of grain threatening to the town? And that's my question, I guess.
That's a really interesting question. That's the first time I've heard that interpretation, but I can totally see where you're coming from. I think for me, the idea is more about her being out of control. And how far can I push that idea? Like, first, the ball eats like a little muffin and it's like all cute and tiny. And then as it gets bigger and bigger, and it starts to devour people and dogs and like crashing into buildings. And I think that was my way of metaphorically explaining what it feels like when it's chemical. Like I would say, I mean, I've never had any other addiction, luckily. But from what I understand, the way that people feel with alcohol addiction or drug addiction, it's very similar. It's this inability to stop. Like, you chemically keep reaching for the thing and you want to stop and your brain is telling you stop, but your hand is reaching for the food and you keep going until you can't anymore.
So in that way, you've just highlighted with alcohol addiction or other kinds of substance abuse, people have to sort of, like, it's my understanding, like, withdraw 100%. Like, if you're an alcoholic, alcohol becomes off limits. But with binge eating disorders, you need to eat. Like, your body still needs sustenance. So how do people think about that?
Oh my God, that was honestly one of the hardest things. And first of all, just to contextualize this, when I was going through the disorder, it wasn't officially recognized yet, which was really scary for me. It became recognized the year after I had it. Even though now it's been statistically proven to be the most common, like more than anorexia and bulimia. And so this was all happening when I was living in New York City, hence the idea of like the devouring the town, because that was basically what my life was going through Manhattan and having this eating disorder. Binge eating disorders, I'm taking this from the National Eating Disorder Information Center. It's characterized by the consumption of an unusually large amount of food during a relatively short period of time, and feeling out of control over what and how much is eaten and when to stop. So some of the symptoms are like eating super quickly. Even though you're not hungry, you eat anyway. You're uncomfortably or painfully full. It's usually done in private, like due to embarrassment, and it brings up a lot of feelings of self-disgust, guilt, and depression. So that was definitely my experience. And so, yeah, because it wasn't recognized right away, it took me a long time to get help. I went on like a very rigid diet that was given to me by nutritionists, where I would like make my meals in advance, and I literally used to hide my credit cards in a drawer, because if I was out in the house, I would end up going on like a whole binge trail, and then that was it. But it was really hard, and I went through a period where I cut out like all sugar and all gluten, and now I'm gluten free because of what I went through, which is always a hard thing to talk about because people assume that it's for trendy reasons. And I'm like not always wanting to say, oh, I had an eating disorder and this is why I can't digest this anymore. And then I went like a year where I was fine, and then I relapsed, and I realized when I finally did get the proper help that I needed, which is a crazy story in itself, I realized that it was really emotionally driven. And that was the big eye opener for me. And like the many years of therapy and work that I've done on it is it's coming from an emotional place where you can't deal with something that's going on internally, and then you gravitate towards the food as a way to kind of comfort yourself.
Your description of the binge eating disorder kind of, and I don't mean to make light of this because as I'll get to very serious in a moment, sounds like the entire month of Tishrei for like many people in the Jewish community, right? Eating a lot of food at
Holidays
times when you're
were
not
so hard for me, Avi. You don't understand. I would go to a Shabbat dinner.
This is where I'm going to.
I'll tell you all the things. Go ahead.
So, like it sounds like the Jewish community is such an enabler, not just when it comes to this type of eating disorder, but so many other types of eating disorders, especially around times of holidays.
Oh, yeah. That really brings me back. I especially while I was still in it, like when I was living in New York and I would come home for the holidays, that was the hardest thing because nobody batted an eye. And that was really scary for me because in my regular life, I would have to hide it because no one would, like, people would look at me weird if I started just eating for like 2 hours straight. But if I was at a Shabbat dinner and there's a big buffet of food, nobody is thinking twice. They're literally piling more food onto your plate.
Yeah, food fascinates me. Food in Judaism fascinates me, the evolution of food, but food's never been a triggering thing for me. So when we get together with family, I kind of expect the food. I look forward to the food. It reminds me of my baba, reminds me of my family. Like it's all positive things, which is kind of interesting in light of this conversation because especially for you, Ilana, it was probably all negative things, at least at certain points in your life, right?
I don't know if it was ever all negative, probably more complicated because there's like the positive and then there's like the trigger. I think now I don't really have those thoughts as much, but I don't enjoy the feeling of feeling bloated because of what I went through. And so that's something I do struggle with. And there's certain like Shavuot, for example, like eating a lot of dairy. I don't feel so good after that. And it takes me like a few days to be like, okay, I just need to like go back to having my regular diet so that I can just feel good in my body.
Yeah, my thing is that it gets boring after a while. You know, like that's the only thing that we do for days at a time. Go to shul, eat, take a nap, go to shul,
and then you just feel
eat,
like a blob.
take a nap, go to sleep, and that's all that's going on for so many days throughout the whole that whole month. Yeah.
I've been trying to go on more walks.
You guys make it sound terrible. I don't know. Like, I feel like it's so much fun. There's other stuff going on. You make it sound terrible.
I'm not. I'm just.
You go to school, you sleep, you eat. It's just like, oh my gosh, what a nightmare. Oh, terrible. Nightmare. People are serving you all these great foods, and like there's tablecloths, and oh my gosh.
Yeah, but who's doing the cooking?
Hey man, I'm the primary cook in my house. We're hosting Erev Rosh Hashanah, always do. So I put in the time. Don't for a second think that I'm only a taker. I'm a giver, because hosting is a big part of it too, right? Like you said, Avi said it in the opening. In a different world where Jewish women worked in the home, bringing people over and using your cooking and welcoming them in, like this was paramount. Like women, I've done so many funerals for women who the pride they had within their family and their extended family for their cooking and for their ability to be a host or hostess as a result was part of their identity. It was part of their existence. Like this is to pardon the pun, but this is baked in to the culture.
So I definitely have that bug, even though I work full time, but hosting and the pride I take in it are like paramount and really important to me, and being part of this community that I love being part of. There's a big hosting culture. There's like a lot of pieces of this, but you're right. Like the sort of previous generations where women mostly worked in their homes and didn't necessarily have jobs beyond that. It allowed for a different dynamic. And now we have this sort of like impossible standard where, you know, most families, I dare say, both parents have jobs, and it's like a lot harder to welcome people into your home and feel comfortable about it. So there is sort of like discourse about sort of normalizing it's okay to go into somebody's house and it be messy, right? Like sometimes I apologize for the mess and they're like, your home is lived in, you have 3 little kids. Also like lowering the standards a little bit on like how extensive the meal needs to be, right? Like nobody needs the giant buffet where you sit and just binge for hours, and just sort of changing that and like making it easier to do, to have that social outlet, increasingly important.
I mean, here's my double standard, I guess, is like in my regular essence, and I think the longer that I have been getting away from my eating disorder years, like I also love to host and I love cooking, and like I get really happy when people take seconds, and my mentality is always like make more. Like I'd rather have too much than not enough, and then like eat it for lunch the next day. So
I'm not saying to not have enough food. I'm saying that like instead of having 7 different dishes, maybe you have 4 or 5. Like that's what I'm saying.
My friend always tells this like the story about like she was hosting some, I can't remember what the holiday was, but she was hosting some big meal for like both her family, her husband's family. They're all coming over, and her mother-in-law said to her, "Well, what did you make?" And she was just like, chicken. And she's just like, "And what other meat did you make? Like, what's the second meat?"
Right. You need 3 kinds of meat.
And she was like, "What? The second meat? What do you mean the second meat? Where are we?"
That's like my aunt's house. My aunt is Moroccan, and her table is like literally like for 5 meals.
But you go there and you're like, "I didn't really want chicken. It's okay. I also made brisket." Who said
and I made like 5
also
other
made
things.
Brisket? Like this
and
is
meatballs.
But it's so interesting because like the food, right? It's so everywhere. 2 meats.
I grew up with friends and cousins who, in the like Moroccan community especially, or like on a weeknight, you'd have 2 proteins.
Wow. What is this?
Like it's Tuesday night and mom's like, "Oh yeah, I made 3 sides and 2 meats and you can have whatever." And like, yeah, it's
Get
crazy.
Out of here. I get it maybe for Rosh Hashanah or break fast, but like give me a break.
What do you think the messages or attitudes around food transmitted by the Jewish community? I mean, I go to like, there's so many fears around like parents or grandparents who lived in the Depression. There's not enough food. And so we have to throw as much food as possible out there. Like you can't waste. All of this stuff is there. Yeah. And I feel people with eating disorders all have a complicated relationship to stuff like that.
I'm not an expert in this, but I would imagine in the Jewish community, there's different ways into this issue. I think part of it comes from the deprivation thing, like Holocaust. I mean, my immediate family is not from the Holocaust, so I don't have that. But I think that there is this like, you never know what might happen. You must feed yourself in case you starve. Like, I really feel that. And then there's like the stereotypes of like, oh, you look so skinny, you need to eat more. But then there's the other side of it, which is like also equally toxic, of people being like, wow, you look so great. Like, you must be taking such good care of yourself. And that was also really scary, because this was more in the acting community, but people would be like, wow, you look amazing. And in my mind, I'm like, this is literally my anxiety making my body like so thin. It's not a good thing. So, you know, it's complex. And I do think that in the Jewish community, I would imagine it's really hard for a lot of Jews to understand the idea of a binge eating disorder. Like, I didn't talk about it to many people while I was going through it, but when I did try to talk to some people, I got a lot of like, oh, what do you do? Like, hide a bag of chips under your bed? Like, ha ha ha, that doesn't sound that bad. You know, people are easy to dismiss it. And I think the conversation around mental health awareness actually all started like right after, which in the long run ended up helping me a lot. But at the time I was still really isolating, and I felt like I couldn't tell anyone.
It has come to my attention recently that Jews, and probably Jewish young women, but let's just say Jews generally, have like, there's a lot more body talk culturally than in other cultures.
Interesting.
Do you have any insight into that, or that's not your experience?
Like, insight into why it would be more prevalent in the Jewish community?
Yeah, like in summer camps or kids in day schools.
I mean, I'm not an expert in that, so I can't really give you any stats from my own personal experience. I feel like, looking back to when the inklings of this started, I actually remember it starting at camp, because I was feeling really isolated in my bunk. I was in my like CIT, counselor in training year, and we all had to sit at one table with the guys and the girls, and I didn't really feel comfortable with some of the people that were in my year. Sorry if any of you are listening. Actually, not sorry, I don't know. And I remember like I didn't want to look up from my plate, and so I just kept eating. And it wasn't even like a conscious decision. It was just there, and it was, you know, looking back on what I would end up binging on like a few years later when I had my eating disorder, are a lot of things that are in Jewish food, like very bread heavy. Like, now the things that I can't eat anymore are like primarily Jewish things. Like, I can't go to Cheskis and have a babka, and I can't have challah, and I can't have all those things. So I think in a way, those comfort foods, I think there is a lot of emphasis on like, oh, you feel bad, have a cookie, have a Danish, have, you know, something to make you feel better. I think Jews tend to gravitate towards food as like a way to feel good. But I'm not going to say I'm blaming Jewish culture for it. I think it's just, it was there.
I don't really see that changing as much as we're more enlightened to it. I don't really see. So with all of this work that you've done on this, what's your attitude on how do we foster a balance between Jews eat a ton of food at a lot of holidays and we need to be a little bit more, you know, smart about it?
I think it comes down to like awareness of eating disorders and having more mindfulness around how different kids will react differently to these things, because it's highly common, and especially like young women. Like, I think it's like late teens to early 20s is the most common for women with binge eating disorder. And for men, it's more like middle age. So I think knowing that women already get a lot of social pressure on looking a certain way, and that can cause a lot of it. That was also kind of an element for me. And that's kind of one of the reasons why I made this film, is that I wanted people who never thought about this as being a thing to kind of stop and be like, do I know someone in my life, or is there someone in my family that might be struggling with this? And maybe I shouldn't just assume that everyone wants like 3 platefuls of cholent when they come over to my house.
Ever since October 7th, 2023, Muslim and Jewish communities in Canada have been torn apart.
I've known you for 20 years. You've been at my house for Shabbat supper, I don't know how many times. And for 1 second, you can't put down your friend and just hold my hand?
We're fed a constant stream of Jews and Muslims talking at each other, about each other, but rarely do we hear them talking to each other.
There was, why are you doing this? What's the benefit of doing this?
This podcast aims to do something different. I'm Avi Feingold, a rabbi and a writer with the Canadian Jewish News.
I'm Yafa Sakeja, a Canadian-Palestinian entrepreneur and volunteer with the Canadian Friends of Standing Together.
We're sitting down with Jews and Muslims, Israelis and Palestinians from coast to coast and across the political divide, having difficult conversations in good faith.
We are not the Israeli government. Palestinians are not Hamas.
This is the place where we're both supposed to end up, Israeli and Palestinian, Arab and Jewish.
Subscribe to In Good Faith, wherever you listen to podcasts.
Most of our friends think we're crazy, even though we live in this like super enlightened. And our philosophy on food turns out that a lot of people say they want to do this, at least in our friend group, but they don't really do it. So we don't say no to anything. You'll never hear you have to eat 3. We go with my nieces and nephews. You have to eat 6 pieces of fruit and then you can have your ice cream. Like the philosophy was this whole idea about putting food on a pedestal and one food's better than another. So we never say any of that kind of stuff. And what's really, really strange is that if you give the boys a choice of the stuff that, like you'd think no other kid, here's a bowl of candy, here's a bowl of fruit. So many times they just choose the fruit. It plays out. It works. It's really great. But they go to my parents' place, and Bob and Zeta can't spoil them because if they say, "Can I have ice cream?" they're just used to like the answer being yes. Sometimes you say it's not on the menu, we don't have it, and you don't have to be completely insane. But this whole business of you've got to eat this before you can eat this. Never. And we have to be so careful when we go to someone's house and then they drop this and the kids look at us like, what kind of weird nonsense world are we living in where you have to eat broccoli to get ice cream? We're like, we don't know. Let's leave. Let's go home back to, but no one really practices this. And we don't have girls. I think it's very, very different with young girls. I have a sister. I have a very different philosophy, but I've seen like a lot of people kind of look at my wife like she's a little crazy, but she's not. I've seen this play out. We've been to birthday parties where the kids are like, I don't really want any cake. Is there apple over there? And one parent said to me, what did you do? How did you do that? What was the magic trick that you did that you got your kid to push away a piece of cake? And I said, this is the philosophy. It's my wife's. It works, but you can't divert from it. Like you really have to change your whole family thinking because I didn't grow up like that. That's crazy. And you go to like my in-laws, they don't really practice like that. So like there's conflicting attitudes towards food within the family, which can make this very difficult. But in our immediate family, it's like our proudest. We screw up a lot of stuff as parents, but it feels like we're doing a good job with this.
I try not to talk about bodies.
Definitely
generally try not to. I don't know how good I am about it. I also like in my own, critical eye of my own body, I try not to manifest that in front of my kids or talk about it. I don't know how successful I am, but I try and I'm definitely aware of it. A lot of people in my family have been blessed with incredible metabolisms. So good for them.
I was going to say,
cheddar cheese and ice cream are the major food groups in our house. It's interesting, Matthew, picking up on what you said. Like, my kids expect a small bowl of ice cream before they go to bed at night as dessert. And whatever. I don't know. There was an article in The Atlantic that talks about ice cream as good because there's protein in it.
I read that article.
But I'll say the last week or so, not everybody even wants it. They're like, no, there's nothing special about ice cream. No thanks.
Exactly. You take away this idea that some food is more special than others or you earn it or something. That's how you get an unhealthy attitude towards food, right?
I'm a big fan of mindful eating where it's don't force your kid to finish their plate if they don't feel like it. If they're full,
totally.
They're full. If they say they don't like something, don't force it on them. Because the program that I did to get better was kind of like a group experience where it was people from all over the world. It was online. And a very common trope that you would hear from people was their parents saying there are starving children in Africa. You need to finish your plate, and how much that actually damaged so many people and led them to having this really unhealthy relationship to food in their adulthood.
It's not about the food necessarily. And
no.
When somebody says that they have an eating disorder, it's not that they have an unhealthy positive or negative relationship to food itself. There's something else going on, and the food is just the way it's being manifested. And so when somebody goes and says, I don't want to eat whatever it is, it's not about how you're a bad cook, right? Exactly. It has nothing to do with that. And you shouldn't feel offended when somebody doesn't want to eat your food because it has it can easily be so many other possible things that are there. And the same thing with body image.
Yeah, I mean, it is tricky because there's a lot of different eating disorders, right? If you have a kid with anorexia, obviously you're going to deal with it very differently, and you definitely want them to eat.
It's not even kids. I thought it was so timely. This 82-year-old guy out of nowhere said hello to me and talked about how I looked.
Wow.
It's funny because I think that it's when you said that stat earlier, Ilana, about the whole it hits women in their late teens and into 20s and men really later on in life. Very, very interesting. But why do we think, maybe is it just Jews or is it just old people? Why are people so
obsessed
with telling you what they think of how you look? Why can't this be an off limits conversation? Talking with you makes me think right now in this moment, my theory, that I'm working on with the three of you is that people are so insecure about their own image that this is what they just accidentally just kind of blurted out because it's on their mind all the time.
Yeah.
So they're going to say, oh, you look a little bit heavier. I'm going to say you're a little bit heavier. It makes me feel better about the fact that I'm heavier or something stupid like that.
I think you're right.
The issue that's going on here goes in so many other places, right? The parent or grandparent that grew up in the Depression and has such food insecurity, their issue around feeding you and making sure you have a lot of food available, or that we have to dole out food very carefully, right? That's about them and that's about their emotional journey, but it's coming out in terms of the food themselves. But we're not always aware that the things that we do to other people or with other people is more about us than it is about the other person themselves.
Absolutely.
A while ago, we had Minna Bromberg on, Rabbi Minna Bromberg, who founded this organization called Fat Torah, which is, dealing with Judaism and body image and so many other things. But, one of the things that I do think about in this new culture where like it's okay to embrace your body, whatever that actually is that there are people who actively don't want that. And so I think of the options that people have, and that there are people that actively want to be thin despite the fact that they are not, and that they are dealing with whatever mental health issue or not. And some people are actually very well adjusted. They just would rather be 100 pounds thinner.
That's the thing.
And that's okay. What I feel uncomfortable with is when we force people to say, well, no, you're fat and you have to embrace that and you have to enjoy it.
I have this conversation a lot with my husband, actually, because he usually says, like, well, some people, like, doesn't mean they have an eating disorder. Like, they could just have big bones and this is their body. And I'm like, I hope you're right, because I feel for them if they are like just struggling with something more deep and internal that they haven't resolved. But I don't know. I on the flip side, like the body positivity movement, I think is a good thing, because then it also takes away this idea of like there's only one way to look beautiful. I think that's important too.
I get that. And I think that gives people the option to recognize that, yes, this is who I am and I'm okay with that. But there are people that aren't. Yeah.
I think we also get something very strange in North America. The portion size is huge. I think about my Baba.
Oh my God.
My Baba's 96 and a half years old, Kinahara, and every time we take her out for a meal, and I feel like I could give her a half portion, the first thing that comes out of her mouth the minute that the plate arrives is, look at the size of all this food. And this is in Winnipeg. And like you go to the States, and I feel like you go overseas, you go to Europe, you go somewhere like Israel, the attitude towards food just in the culture in general is a way more of a less is more kind of thing. So I think you get this North American thing that is just like this double or triple whammy on top of like this pervasive food invading, like you said in your movie, food literally invading the world.
Ilana Zackon, thank you so much for being on Not in Heaven.
Thank you.
Congrats on the
Good luck
film.
on the film. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so cool. What an accomplishment and all the accolades. How do people find it?
Yeah, so right now we're trying to get into the festival circuit. So the next screening is happening in Germany in November, the T-Short Animated Film Festival.
Are you going to that?
No, it's a small festival. So
there's the first time I visited Germany, I was shocked by how much bread there was. So I would just kind of like say it's like a very bread culture. Like,
then even better for them to watch my film. So the next screening, if you're in Germany, if you happen to be listening, you can follow my film on social media, grainshortfilm.com, Grain Short Film on Instagram, Grain Short Film on Facebook. I also will give a little shameless plug that I have a GoFundMe going right now because my grant money is done. So it's going really well. I'm getting closer and closer to my goal, and I've only had the GoFundMe for a few days. So if you feel inspired by this and want to help me spread the message on binge eating disorder and body image awareness, that's the plan. And I'm hoping to get it to a bunch of festivals over the next couple of years and maybe find a distributor to be able to have it publicly available online. Or if not, I'll just put it out for free and we'll see where it goes from there.
On that note, I'd like to mention the organization A Mitzvah to Eat that considers centrally people with different kinds of eating disorders and how they can ritually fast. Right? Like somebody with anorexia probably shouldn't fast on Yom Kippur. So I just want to throw that out there as a resource for our listeners. If anybody is struggling with an eating disorder, that's one place to look for support for, Jewish ritual and halacha.
Excellent.
Very cool. Good luck.
Thank you. So nice to meet you, Matthew and Yedida. It was a really good conversation.
Great to talk to you. Thanks.
Coming up next, textual healing.
Textual healing. It's time for some textual healing. Let's get biblical. Tell me a parsha, and we'll make it physical. Textual healing. It's time for some textual healing.
Parshat Ki Tavo. We're nearing the end. We're in the home stretch. This is the blessings and curses. Who has some textual healing for us? Yedida, you got something?
I do have something. The beginning of this week's Parsha has the instructions for the farmer who brings his first fruits, his bikurim, to the temple, and the whole script that he recites when he gets there. I guess we could have women farmers, but it's in male language, so I'm just going to go with that. When I've done major analysis of the Pesach Haggadah, one notices that the script that the farmer says when he brings his first fruits to the temple actually forms the backbone of the Pesach Haggadah. And I've long wondered why that is. Like, why on Pesach do we use these verses from Deuteronomy to tell the story? And to sort of be the backbone of the lots of midrashim that we share. Why wouldn't we just, read excerpts from the book of Exodus that tells that story the first time? And I think that the answer is, and I think that this is sort of inherent in the passage in Devarim and also throughout this parsha, is this emphasis on God as the God of history and God, the God who keeps God's promises. And I think that comes out in this little script, but it also shows up a little bit later in 26:15, where there's this call for God to look out from God's perch, presumably in heaven, and see the people that he has fulfilled his promise to when we get there. So I just one of the themes I think of Devarim is God keeping God's promise. And I think that comes out in the Bikurim. And that's also what we're emphasizing when we tell the Pesach story at Pesach.
I wanted to talk about that part too, Yedida, because and I've often made the connection too, because it's just like Arami Oved Avi, right? Like my father was a wandering Aramean. And you're like, wait a second, isn't that one of the early readings that even my family didn't skip? Like Se Umad. Like, come and learn what Laban, in that case, it just sounds so familiar. But what I like about it is that you say, so the farmer gets his first fruits, he goes to the temple, and he doesn't just offer them, he has the script he has to say. And I always like the idea that Judaism puts emphasis on verbalizing things. Mm-hmm. I remember this teaching that there are certain places where we're told Zachor, remember something. But aren't we supposed to remember all the mitzvot? Why do these mitzvot get singled out? And one of the teachings I remember learning was when you say Zachor at Yom HaShabbat, like when you have to remember the Sabbath, you have to make Kiddush to say something out loud to fulfill the idea of remembering it. If we just kind of say, oh, I've got it in my head. No, write it down, or in this case, say it out loud. When you go and you offer this offering, and you're supposed to be mindful of the fact that the land was a gift, that your ancestors were promised from God, like you talk about promises, and you say, okay, I'll go and I'll give the first fruits. You can get into a routine, but when you have to say out loud, I got these first fruits from the land that was promised to my ancestors, it really makes it hard to take it for granted, because the saying out loud is this extra level of almost protection against really forgetting, or I guess maybe against it not being a meaningful experience. So I always had this lesson in Ki Tavo, say it out loud. I like it.
We call those in religion speech acts, right? That you have to, right? Like if you're marrying somebody, you have to say the formula. Like you have to say it out. You have to say it out loud. It changes the action.
As if you know what that is called. I love that you guys know what that is called. I just know the concept. And of course it's got a name and you know it. I love that.
I'm going to the very end of the Torah portion. After all the curses. You know what? One of the things that I've been liking about doing these textual healings is finding the little corners of the Parsha that people aren't trying to pay attention to, because you don't have to come up with as much of an insight. You just have to highlight it for people. He's like, oh, look at that thing over there.
You're giving away your tricks.
Yeah, totally. There's nothing wrong with that. The end of the Parsha has this little mini exhortation from Moshe, which is setting up his last speech, which is going to be the last three portions. And so the very end of the Parsha is the beginning of this third and final speech of Moshe Rabbeinu. And in it, he basically does a really interesting thing where he turns the 40 years of wandering in the desert, which we learned already in Parashat Shalach was a punishment for the spies. right? That it was like God went and said, you don't deserve the land. You're going to wander the desert, and none of you are going to be in the land now. All of your children will only be in the land, and you don't get to do that. And that was very clear in Bamidbar, that was why we were wandering in the desert for so long. And Moshe goes and flips it around, and he basically says, no, it was positive. It took 40 years for you guys to understand what God was. And so the 40 years in the desert was our way of teaching you, was God's way of showing you that this is what God is, and now you're ready to get into the land, right? It was basically like school. And you want to know what was great about living in the desert for 40 years? There were all these miracles. Your clothes didn't wear out, and you didn't eat regular bread or drink wine. All you had was man and quail and all of this stuff. And it's basically, I put you in a 40-year miracle so that you can get set in your mind that God is God, and that now you're ready to enter the land. Now you're an adult, and that's it. So some commentators they point out, you see, it takes 40 years to really develop any wisdom. And that's why we say, 40 years till Binah. And that's what, we have all of these people. There are commentaries that get into that. But I just like at the surface level, right, taking this punishment and turning it into something positive. And then, because I was looking at various commentaries about this, and this is apropos of nothing, Rabbeinu Bachya, who is a 14th century commentator, just in middle of this passage talking about this, goes and says, in case you wonder why the curses that Moshe just spoke were very different from the curses in Vayikra, at the end of Vayikra, well, it's because these are ones that Moshe said himself and wrote himself instead of coming from God. It's like all of a sudden Bachya is like a 20th century Bible critic, and he's like, oh, I know that there are differences, and that's okay because Moshe said these. But in case you think that this is sacrilegious to think that Moshe wrote part of the Torah on his own, no, because he actually intuited what God would have wanted to say for the blessings and the curses, and that's exactly word for word what Moshe ended up saying. So even though it was his inspiration, right, it came from God, and therefore it's not like problematic to think that there are multiple things in the Torah, and that there are multiple voices in the Torah, that there are different things that are said differently, and that's okay, and don't think bad about it, and Moshe's great. And it's like this wonderful 14th century way of oh yeah, don't worry, Bible criticism, we got this.
I love that. I also love your thought on Moshe flipping it around. And I was thinking as you were saying it, Avi, Moses was pretty incredible. They should write a book about him. And then I was thinking, they did. It's called the Torah. And that's why we break this down every week, because it's so good. It's just so good.
Thank you for listening to Not in Heaven this week. Our producer and editor is Zachary Kaufman. Michael Freeman is the executive producer. To catch every episode, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to support our show, consider making a donation to the CJN at thecjn.ca/donate.